I just want to say we're so passionate about classic movies. We're going to expand the conversation.
You can see the passion that's in this room.
It's thrilling to the core.
Put a new spin on some vintage films.
It's classic movies and more.
Hi, this is Anne Marie Gaddy for Classic Movies and More, and I'm so happy. We have a very special guest today. We have Meredith Ponedel with us today, who is the daughter of Bernard Ponedel and the niece of Dottie Ponedel, and I'm going to let Meredith tell you a little bit about them because she really has a wonderful story to tell. So welcome, Meredith. We're so happy that you're here today.
Thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to be here and sharing my family's Hollywood stories.
Excellent. And I just have to tell everyone, I met Meredith for the first time a couple of nights ago, and oh my gosh, I felt like we had so much in common. I felt like I've known her for like 20 years. So it was really wonderful that she was able to do this interview with us on such short notice. So can you tell our fans a little bit about your dad? Let's start with your dad first, Bernard Ponedel.
Bernard, right. He actually started as a makeup artist in the mid-30s. My aunt, who started first, got him into the business. He worked at many different studios with many different stars. He ended up in I believe the early 40s, starting to work with Frank Sinatra. And he ended up staying with Frank until the mid-60s, late 60s actually. And was basically his makeup artist, his pseudo bodyguard. If you wanted to get to Frank, you had to go through my dad first. He knew all of Frank's friends and all the regular crew members that worked with him.
So now he was Frank's makeup artist. What were some of the movies just off the top of your head that he would have worked on? I mean, probably too many to mention.
From Here to Eternity, A Hole in the Head.
Oh my gosh, one of my favorite
all the
MGM
movies. On the Town and Take Me Out to the Ball Game.
So now, I mean, I have to ask, have you met Frank Sinatra?
When I was young. When I was much younger, yeah. In fact, I would go to his house sometimes. I remember poker games. I remember learning at a very early age to keep my mouth shut.
Okay, fair enough.
Don't walk around and talk about what you see. And he was just a nice guy. I liked him a lot.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You know, I didn't know really who he was. I just knew he was Uncle Frank and he was a nice guy.
Wow, so when you realized who he was,
yeah,
no big deal, huh?
No, it was just, he's still a nice guy.
He's one of my favorite singers of all time.
Oh,
I
mine
think
too.
Singer, that's such a small word to use
Mine
for him.
too. Because of all the people Dot and Dad worked with, he used to play this game with me. My dad did when we were driving in the car somewhere, and especially back in the 60s when the singers were well known to all of us of a certain age, you know. And if Frank came on, I had to identify him. If Tony Bennett came on, or Vic Damone, or one of Steve Lawrence, who's that singing? What's the song? Who's the arranger? Who did the orchestration? Who wrote the song?
Wow.
This kind of thing. Because my dad had been there for so much of it. So
Wow.
it was a fun game.
That's interesting. Did that have any effect? I happen to know that Meredith also is a vocalist as well. So did that, growing up around Frank and having your dad share with you all this wonderful music, I mean, did that make you want to aspire then to go into the arts, to learn to sing, to...
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it did, huh?
And I did for quite a while. I started taking dancing when I was 4 and piano. And I kept at it for a while, on and off, and then later on I would take singing lessons, attend theater arts workshops, and the more I got into it, the more my family, my dad and my aunt, thwarted me at every attempt.
Now, you're mentioning your aunt, so I'm going to segue now to Dottie Ponedel. So can you tell, there's so much to tell, I think, and maybe because I'm a woman, I'm so mesmerized by her story, but can you tell us a little bit about your Aunt Dottie?
Dot came out here first from Chicago with her mother in 1920. Her father had died. Dot was now the erstwhile breadwinner, being the oldest, and she wasn't doing well health-wise in Chicago. It was too cold. Her job working at a department store was, they had her in a basement. And there was no air conditioning back in those days. It was very crowded and very close, and so the doctor said you need to get to a warmer climate. So they piled everything they had, took a couple $100, which is all they had, and they came out to California. And they were lucky enough to find a bakery franchise, which is in the Westlake area of Los Angeles, close to downtown. And because they were right near a streetcar stop, a lot of people would come in for donuts and baked goods on their way to work. And one day Dot met a young woman who was going to an audition through Central Casting, or what passed for Central Casting in 1920. And Dot went along for the ride and got the job. And the rest, as they say, is history. Dot ended up in silent movies for 6 to 7 years,
Wow.
playing dancers, extras, character parts, Indian guides. And then she accidentally, as she accidentally got into silent film, she accidentally got into makeup.
Wow. Now I'm going to go back to the silent films
Okay.
now. So if I want to see your aunt, if I want to see her in a movie, can you give me a few to look for?
I can, but being that she would basically be in the background.
Oh, okay. Very hard to
Greta
spot.
Garbo's The Torrent is one of them. She was dancing. You actually do get a good shot of her in that, doing a lot of turning around and a lot of Spanish dancing with a big old multicolored Spanish shawl. I know the Spanish shawl was multicolored because Dot said so, even though the film's in black and white. She did play the character of Little Wolf, which is an Indian guide. She used to characterize herself as the first Tonto in several Bob Custer movies. Galloping Vengeance, Border Justice, I don't remember the names of the others. She was in something called Across the Pacific, which is now considered a lost film. Something about Island of Lost Souls or Island of Lost Women, something about that. She was also in something fairly important for the time, a Fox film made in '26 called Sandy, which does still exist. And some friends of mine went to see it at MoMA in New York.
Oh, wow.
And they saw her in it.
Oh,
so
that's
she's there. She's in.
wonderful.
I have, luckily, my grandmother, Dot's mother, kept all her stills from the silence. So even though several of those films are lost, I have the stills, so I can pinpoint Dot in any sequence.
Oh, that's marvelous. So now, okay, so your Aunt Dot was in the movies as an extra, but now she did segue to makeup artist, and a very famous one at that. But back then, tell us a little bit about how she got into makeup, what the challenges were. Couldn't have been easy for a woman back then, I would imagine.
It was horrible for a woman back then. She, as she got into the silence by accident, she happened to be on set one day for the 1929 movie Follow Through with Jack Haley and Nancy Carroll. And Dot, being Dot, wasn't about to not speak up if she thought everyone needed to know what she had to tell. So the director was not happy at one point with the way Nancy Carroll had come out in a particular scene. He didn't like the way she looked. It just wasn't working. So Dot piped up with a suggestion for a different kind of makeup, a different kind of shading and contouring. And Nancy said, okay, let's try it. So Dot got everything together that they had to work with at the time, and she did her magic on Nancy Carroll's face. And it worked.
Wow.
And they loved it, and they were able to use the scenes that they shot, and it was fine. So come the next day, Nancy wants to use Dot again. She was refused. The director said, you can't use her, she's not in the union, she's a woman, there are no women makeup artists, there were only men at that point in time. And they refused to let her use Dot. So Nancy Carroll, according to Dot, did her own makeup for the scene and deliberately did it wrong.
Oh my gosh.
So they
how
had to
fabulous.
scrap everything they shot, and at that point, they got Dot on there.
Wow, that was fabulous.
It was, and Dot just bulled her way in. She saw an opening and she took it. She was never shy about anything like that.
Wow. So what happened next? Because I can't wait to get to the part, well, you know where I can't wait to get to.
Well,
But-
she kept working. She became known, I think, partly for the fact that she was obviously very good at what she did. She told me after she started getting into it, she made it a point to go to the libraries and bookstores, and she would study art books, in particular Van Gogh, Rembrandt, how they, and others of course, but how they used lighting and shading and contouring as they worked on people's faces.
Wow, that's
And
very
that was her
interesting.
training, among other things. And so she got to be known, and women, I believe, that the female stars of that era like having one of their own working on them. She was someone they could confide in and trust. That was one of her hallmarks, I found out later, was she could be completely trusted with any information, any confidential information
Wow.
given her. And so gradually she worked to the point where she was heard about by Joseph von Sternberg, who wanted her to work on Dietrich when he first brought her to Paramount, and which she did and pioneered several different techniques with Dietrich. Mae West had it written into her contract that, according to Mae, quote unquote, nobody else is going to pat this puss.
Oh.
And so she worked with Mae West and ended up working with Stanwyck and Lombard and Blondell, Gail Sondergaard, Gladys Swarthout, Gail Patrick, Tallulah Bankhead. The men, people like Gable, Barrymore, Cooper, George Raft was a particular friend, close friend of hers.
Wow.
And it went on from there.
What a list of names.
She had to struggle the whole time. They didn't want her in the union. When the union was first formed as a union, it had previously been a guild. And she had been, I think, a member of the guild more or less, however but when they actually created Local 706 in the late 30s, you had to join the local to work. And they didn't want her to join the local. So as the story went, and this is what I read in the newspaper articles at the time, they refused to let Dot join the union, and at one particular point in time, on a particular day during the week, they were told by Dietrich and Mae West that if Dottie was not allowed to join the union, they will not come back to work on Monday.
That's amazing.
And Dot necessarily was able to join the union at that point in time.
Well, but what a testament to her talent that all of these women, these major stars, would do that.
It was very much a women's movement. They were all in it together. I was somewhat skeptical, having grown up hearing many of these stories. When I was a child, of course, I believed everything. As I got older, it was kind of, oh yeah, right. Until about, I don't know, remember how long ago it was, but when Frances D was visiting this area, the Hollywood area, for a particular Hollywood event going on, I had known her when I was a child, and so I got to re-meet her again and spend a few days with her, which was wonderful. And I happened to be asking her about some of these stories, and she totally corroborated all of them. She said, absolutely.
Wow.
Not only did she corroborate the stories I was questioning, she mentioned to me that if Dot said it, it was so. Dot was not someone to lie or stretch the truth, so I could totally believe anything that she had told me. In fact, she was kind of incensed that I would even suggest that maybe Dot wasn't entirely truthful about it. She said, oh no, if your aunt said it, that's the way it was.